welcome back. Let's continue with semantics. So remember, all linguistic signs consist of a pairing of form and meaning. Form is something like the actual words the cat said on the mat, which you can think of as a sequence of phonemes or as a structure of syntactic phrases. Meaning is this funny thing that's something like the image that's evoked in your mind when you hear the sentence, or it's something like the set of things in the world that are referred to by this sentence. And in semantics, we're focusing on meaning. What exactly is meaning? What is the structure of meaning? So semantics so far, we've drawn this very important distinction between two aspects of linguistic meaning, and they're called sense and reference. Now, when we get to the next section, pragmatics, we're going to actually see that there is a third aspect of meaning beyond sense and reference. But in semantics, so far, there are just two. There's sense and reference. Sense is the mental representation of a meaning. It's the concept evoked by words or sentences. Reference is the actual entities in the world that are being referred to by a linguistic expression. So remember this dialogue. We have two ladies chatting. One of them mentions that cup, and that evokes an image or a concept or some kind of usage-based representation in the mind of the woman who's being talked to here. The reference is the physical cup itself, and whatever that is in the mind of the person who's listening, that is the sense of the utterance. Okay. We talked about lexical semantics. That's the sense and the reference of words. We saw that words have different kinds of reference. Proper names refer to a particular entity, one entity. Common nouns, adjectives, and intransitive verbs refer to sets of entities. Now you might answer, what about things like transitive verbs, ditransitive verbs, sentential verbs? Well, that's all more advanced semantic stuff. If you want to learn about that, then you should take a class in semantics in our language science department here. We also saw that words are related to each other in different ways. Words form a network of relationships which you can define in terms of their reference. Hyponyms identify a subset of the reference of hypernyms. So hypernym refers to the bigger set. Hyponym refers to the smaller subset. Synonyms have the same reference. And we also talked about antonyms, which have contrasting reference, which in turn break down into gradable antonyms and complementary antonyms. Now there's one more bit of lexical semantics that I want to talk about, and that's semantic ambiguity. So remember, when we were talking about syntax, we talked about lexical and structural ambiguity. Remember, lexical ambiguity was like the word love could be either a verb or a noun. That was syntactic ambiguity, that was lexical ambiguity, which is a form of syntactic ambiguity. In semantic ambiguity, we note that words can have multiple different meanings. So even if they have the same syntactic category, they might have different possible meanings. Now, homonyms are words that sound the same, but they have totally unrelated meanings. For example, the word bat, which is a noun, and the other word bat, which is a noun. Think of the word bat. What different meanings can you come up with for bat as a noun? Well, it could be this furry creature that flies around and squeaks, or it could be this wooden instrument that you use when you're playing baseball. So there are two entirely different senses here, two entirely different sets of references also for this word bat. That is semantic ambiguity. So the way we think about this is there's actually different signs here. There's two different signs, bat, which refers to the thing that flies around, and bat, which refers to really the set of these wooden instruments that you use when you're playing baseball. When we're talking about homonyms, we're thinking about this as two different signs which just happen to share the same form. So there's no relationship at all between these two meanings, between the thing that flies around and the thing you use to hit baseballs. No relationship. It's just an accident that the form in these two signs happens to be the same. It's also possible for a word to have multiple meanings that are still related to each other. And we call that polysemy, and we call a word which is ambiguous in this way polysemous. So for example, the word paper could refer to these things, these physical pieces of paper that you pick up and give to someone or you write on them. So paper could refer to the set of all of these things. Paper could also refer to a document on your computer that you need to turn in for a class or something, right? So these are two different sets. I think you'll agree, physical paper is different than a document on your computer, but they're clearly related to each other, right? These meanings are not unrelated, they're related. So we say they're polysemous. And the way we think about this is actually one sign which has the form paper paired with these two different meanings, which are related to each other. So when a word is polysemous, that means it has multiple different meanings and those meanings are related to each other. When it's homophonous, that means that it has two different meanings and those meanings are not related to each other. So that's it for lexical semantics. Now I'm going to turn to compositional semantics. So remember our principle of compositionality, which says that the meaning of a sentence, the meaning of the whole, is the meaning of the parts and how they're combined. Compositional semantics is the study of how the meanings in words combine together to form the meanings of sentences. So lexical semantics was about the meanings of the parts. Compositional semantics is about how the meaning changes when those parts are combined to form a sentence. So the cat, well, that's a noun phrase. It has some reference. On the mat, that's a prepositional phrase. It has some reference. We haven't talked about what the reference of a prepositional phrase is yet, but you could figure it out. And sat here, that's an intransitive verb. It has a reference, which is really the set of all things that are sitting or that were sitting. But when these parts, which each refer to some set, when these parts combine together, they form something. They form something called a proposition. And compositional semantics is the study of how the meanings of the parts combine together to form the meaning of a whole. So the first thing we can ask is, are all meanings really compositional in this way? Compositional means that the meaning of the whole is a function of the meaning of the parts and how they're combined. But is that really always the case? So a sentence like, "It is raining today," has a meaning which is compositional. So you can see that the meaning of the whole is just a function of the meaning of the parts. "It is raining today" means it's raining, and it means it's happening today. You get the raining part of the meaning from the word raining. You get the today part of the meaning from the word today, and so on. It's compositional. You could, if you wanted to, figure out the meaning of the sentence by looking up the meanings of the words. So how about this, though? "It's raining cats and dogs." So when you say it's raining cats and dogs, you don't mean that there are cats and dogs falling from the sky. You just mean it's raining really hard. So the meaning of "it's raining cats and dogs" is not compositional. The meaning is not a function of the meanings of the parts. The meaning cat, the set of all cats in the world, and the meaning of dog, the set of all dogs in the world, they don't have anything to do with the meaning of the phrase "it's raining cats and dogs." It's an idiom, and it's non-compositional. An idiom is a phrase whose meaning is not a function of the meanings of its parts. So let's look at some examples of compositional versus non-compositional meanings. How about this? "Bob pulled strings to get the job." Is this compositional in its meaning? How about "Bob pulled strings to unravel the cloth"? Well, in the first case, it's not compositional. When I say Bob pulled strings to get the job, I mean he drew on relationships in order to get his job. There's no actual strings involved. But when I say Bob pulled strings to unravel the cloth, then yes, he's actually pulling on strings. So the meaning of the whole there is the meaning of the parts and how they're combined. Whereas in the first one, pulled strings to get the job, it's not compositional. How about this? "Bob kicked the bucket." Compositional or not? Well, it's not compositional, it's an idiom. When you say he kicked the bucket, you mean he died. That's not a function of anything involving buckets or kicking. If I say Bob kicked the door, on the other hand, that's compositional because the meaning involves a door and it involves kicking. So we've talked about compositional and non-compositional meaning. Now we're going to focus in on how meaning works when it is compositional, because that's the simpler case. So how is it that you combine the meaning of an adjective and the meaning of a noun to get the meaning of the whole? How does composition work in this very simple case? So remember, the reference of the adjective green is the set of all green things in the world. So all these different things that are green. The set of all those things is the reference of the adjective green. Also this sweater. Now the reference of the common noun sweater is again going to be the set of all the entities in the world that can be described as a sweater. The set of all sweaters in the world. So here they are. Now what would be the meaning of the combined phrase green sweater? So syntactically what's happening here is the adjective green is combining with the noun sweater to form a new noun. And so because it's a noun, we know that its reference is going to be a set of entities, just as the reference of sweater is a set of entities. But how do we derive that set? What is the set of things referred to by green sweater combining together to form a noun? Well, we just take the intersection of the two sets. So the intersection of things that are green and of things that are sweaters is the set of green sweaters. So the things that are both green and sweaters, the things that are in both sets, the overlapping things there, those are the green sweaters. So the way that the reference of these two words combine to form the reference of the phrase, in this case, is a simple set intersection. So the reference of green sweater is just what's left over in the intersection here. So this works for adjectives which are called intersective adjectives. So the meaning of some adjective-noun combinations is computed in this way as the intersection of the references of the adjectives and the nouns. When the meanings combine in this way, this is what we call pure intersection. And an adjective that combines with the meaning of a noun in this way is called an intersective adjective. Some examples of this would be things like healthy cow. So you can identify that just as the set of things that are healthy and the set of things that are cows. Take the set intersection and you get healthy cow. Blue suit, take the set of things that are blue, the set of things that are suit, do a set intersection and you get the set of blue suits, and so on. But many other adjectives are something else, something we call subsective. So what about something like big whale? What's up with that? So we can define the set of all whales. That would be the reference of the noun whale. Here they are. But what really is the reference of the adjective big? So can we really define the set of all things in the world that are big? Well, what would we have in that set? What would be the set of all big things in the world? Like Jupiter? Jupiter's really big, right? It's the biggest thing in the solar system except the sun, I guess. How about this? This is the world's largest popcorn kernel. I mean, it's big for a popcorn kernel, but it's a lot smaller than Jupiter. And it's a lot smaller than this mountain, which you would certainly call big. You would certainly call all of these things big, but the popcorn kernel is really small compared to the mountain, and the mountain is really small compared to Jupiter. So this is not really a well-defined set. What really is going on here? You couldn't really find the set of big whales by just intersecting the set of whales with a set of things that are big. So the problem here fundamentally is that the meaning of the word big is relative. What's really going on with words like big and small is that within the set of things that you might call whales, there's going to be some subset that are big and some subset that are small. And adjectives that work this way are called subsective. Their reference depends on the noun they are modifying. So maybe these guys, like this little killer whale and this little humpback whale, these baby whales, those are small within the set of whales. And so if we want to find the set of small whales, what we need to do is zoom in on that particular subset of whales, which are small for whales. So that's not a set intersection. I can't just take the set of things that are small and the set of things that are whales and intersect them. Rather, I have to take the set of whales, I have to identify the small ones within that set and then take that subset. So within the set of whales, there is the set of things that are small for a whale. And those things that are small for a whale might be big when compared to a popcorn kernel, but they're still small for a whale, and so they would be in the reference of a phrase like small whale. So the reference of something like small whale is the subset of the reference of whale, which you would describe as small. So big and small, subsective adjectives. The meaning of big whale is not just the intersection of the reference of big and the reference of whale, because the reference of big is actually relative to the noun that it's modifying. This is also what's called relative intersection. Some other examples of relative intersection are things like tall person. Well, a tall person might be tall compared to other people, but that person will not be tall compared to the Empire State Building, right? Loud music. Well, the loudest possible music is pretty loud for music, but it's not as loud as the loudest possible sound in the universe. Good food. This is an extremely relative intersection. Within the set of food, you can identify the subset, which you might call good, but how would you define the set of things that are good without considering the particular noun that's being modified? A third kind of adjective is what's called non-intersective adjectives. So how about something like this, alleged criminal? So could we say that the meaning of alleged criminal is just the set of things that are criminals intersected with the set of things that are alleged? No, it doesn't quite work, because what would be the set of things that are alleged, right? An alleged criminal also might not even be in the set of criminals. Someone who's an alleged criminal might not actually be a criminal. And so alleged is what we call a non-intersective adjective, because however it is that you're forming the set of entities, which is the reference of alleged criminal, it's not just set intersection. You're not just intersecting the criminals with the things that are alleged. How about something like fake gun? This is an even more extreme case. So a fake gun is not a gun that's fake. In fact, it's not a gun. So you can't form the reference of this by taking the set of guns, intersecting that with a set of things that are fake, because a fake gun is not actually a gun. It's not in the set of guns. So fake is actually what we call an anti-intersective adjective. So how is it you combine adjectives and nouns? They compose in a few different ways. For pure intersection, which works for intersective adjectives, the reference of the adjective and noun combining to form a noun is the intersection of the reference of the adjective and the reference of the noun. That's the simplest case. And adjectives that participate in pure intersection are what's called intersective adjectives. Relative intersection, on the other hand, is when the reference of an adjective-noun combination is a subset of the reference of the noun defined by the adjective. And the adjectives that participate in relative intersection are what's called subsective adjectives. Non-intersection is the third option. That's when the reference of the adjective-noun combination is actually not necessarily a subset of the reference of the noun. And anti-intersection is an extreme form of that, where the reference of the adjective-noun combination is definitely not a subset of the reference of the noun. And so those are the different ways in which the reference of an adjective combines with the reference of a noun to form the reference of the combined phrase. So we have here a syntactic rule which says a noun can consist of an adjective followed by a noun. That syntactic rule is paired with a semantic rule, which tells you how the references of the adjective and the noun combine to give you the reference of the combined noun. So now I want to talk about the sense and the reference of an entire sentence. So we started off talking about sense and reference of words. Just now we talked about the compositional reference of simple phrases like adjectives and nouns combining. Now we're going to look at the biggest unit. We're going to look at the sense and the reference of sentences, whole sentences. We'll start with reference. So the reference of a noun, an adjective, or an intransitive verb is a set of entities in the world. We've seen this. But what is the reference of a sentence? When I say something like, Sally read a book, what is the reference of that entire sentence? Or if I say something like, China is the most populous country in the world, what is the reference of that sentence? How would you describe the reference of that sentence? So it's going to be something we call a proposition. Now I'm going to introduce the idea of propositions. So a sentence conveys an assertion that something about the world is true. When I say China is the most populous country in the world, I'm asserting that some state of affairs in the world is true. So the sense of a sentence is what we call a proposition. A proposition is just anything that can be true or false in the world. It's like a claim. A proposition is just anything you can assert. It's anything that could be true or false. Sentences have truth values. They could be either true or false. When I say China is the most populous country in the world, that's true. When I say something like America has a queen, that's false. So sentences can be true or they can be false. They have a truth value. The reference of a sentence is that truth value. So the sense of a sentence is a proposition, which is like a claim. And the reference of the sentence is the actual truth value, the true or the false. It's whether that claim is true or false. So, for example, let's think about a sentence like this. China is the most populous country in the world. Its truth value currently is true. So the reference of the sentence is actually true. It is the truth value true. I am wearing a tie. Okay, do you see a tie? No. So the truth value of the sentence is false. The reference of the sentence is false. What it's referring to is the truth value false. A proposition, which remember is the sense of a sentence, a proposition is anything that can have any truth value, whether that be true or false. Whether it's true or false doesn't matter. What matters is that it could be true or false. So, for example, these sentences here have truth values. How about something like green sweater? If I just say green sweater, could that be true or false? Could I give you a true or false question on an exam where the question is just green sweater and you have to say true or false? No, because green sweater is not the kind of thing that can be true or false. It's a noun. It's not a sentence. It doesn't express a proposition. So the truth value of green sweater is not applicable. The reference of green sweater is a set of things in the world. It's not a truth value. How about something like the cat? Again, it doesn't have a truth value. So it's not expressing a proposition. Its sense is not a proposition. Its reference is some entities in the world. Its reference is not a truth value. So we can ask, do these things express propositions? Yes. The first one, China is the most populous country in the world. Yes, it expresses a proposition. I am wearing a tie. Yes, it expresses a proposition. The remaining ones do not express propositions. Proposition is anything that could be true or false. So one way that you can test for whether something is a proposition is to apply this following test. You can say an expression X expresses a proposition if it makes sense in any possible world to say it is true that X. So that doesn't have to be our actual current word. It means any possible world. So I can say China is the most populous country in the world. Does it make sense in any possible world to say China is the most, it is true that China is the most populous country in the world? Yes, it makes perfect sense to say that. How about this? I'm wearing a tie. Does it make sense in any possible world to say it is true that I'm wearing a tie? Yes. So these both express propositions. How about this? Green sweater. Would it make sense to say it is true that green sweater? No, it makes no sense at all. In fact, it's ungrammatical. How about the cat? Would it make sense in any possible world to say it is true that the cat? No, ungrammatical, it doesn't work. not expressing a proposition. So a proposition has what are called truth conditions. Truth conditions are conditions that would have to be true to make the proposition true in any possible world. So for example, here is an expression, the Queen of England is sleeping. Now this has some truth value. It is either true or false. As of the time you're watching this video, this either is true or false, but do you know whether it's true or false? I think you probably don't know. And if you do know, then that's really interesting, and you should leave a comment about how you know currently that the Queen of England is sleeping. The point is just that it has some truth value, true or false, but you don't know what it is, so it still expresses a proposition. We don't know if it's true or false, but we know its truth conditions. You know what about the world would have to be true in order to make this sentence true. So it would have to be the case that on insert your current date that you're watching this, at exactly insert your current time, the individual the Queen of England refers to is asleep. So in order for the proposition to be true, these truth conditions have to be true. So we've established that the sense of a sentence is a proposition and the reference of a sentence is a truth value. What I want to talk about now is how we build a proposition. How do the parts of the sentence combine together to form a proposition? So this means we're going to have to think about the composition of a verb phrase and a noun phrase. Like this, Bob walks. So first of all, we note that this expresses a proposition because it makes sense in some possible world to say it is true that Bob walks. Okay, so it's a sentence, expresses a proposition. We don't know whether it's true or false. We don't really care. What we care about is that it expresses a proposition with some truth conditions. What are those truth conditions, and how can we derive those truth conditions by looking at the meanings of the parts? Well, we notice that syntactically, this is its structure. It has a noun phrase, Bob, and then a verb phrase, walks, and those are combining together to form a sentence, S. So remember, Bob refers to the person Bob himself, not a set, but the actual single entity Bob himself. And walks refers to the set of all things that are walking in the world. So this hiker and this family and these people on the beach. And in fact, Bob is also in that set. So how do we form the meaning of the proposition for the sentence out of the reference for the NP and the reference for the VP? Here's what we do. The proposition, which is expressed by the noun phrase and the verb phrase combining together to form a sentence, is, it is true that Bob is a subset of the people who are walking. So the truth condition here, for this sentence to be true, it has to be the case that Bob is a subset of the people who are walking. So we have we have A, which is an entity, and B, which is a set. When I say Bob walks, the sense of that sentence is the proposition whose truth conditions are that A is a subset of B. So the proposition is true if and only if A, the person Bob, is a subset of B, the set of people who are walking. The reference of the sentence, given these particular sets, given this particular world, is true. So the sense of an NP-VP combination when they form a sentence is always the proposition the reference of the NP is a subset of the reference of the VP. That is the semantic rule that goes along with the syntactic rule that says that a sentence can consist of a noun phrase followed by a verb phrase. And the reference of that NP-VP combination in the world is either true or false, depending on if the proposition is actually true or false. So now I'd like to talk about relationships between propositions. So remember, in lexical semantics, we talked about this network of relationships among words. Now we're going to think about networks of relationships among propositions. So there are relationships between propositions. For example, here's a sentence, all dogs bark. It expresses some proposition. There are some truth conditions, conditions that have to be true in order for it to be true that all dogs bark. And here's another sentence. Sally's dog barks. Okay, that is also expressing a proposition. It's a more specific proposition. In fact, we say the relationship here is entailment, because if it is true that all dogs bark, then it must be true that Sally's dog barks, because Sally's dog is a subset of all dogs. One proposition entails another if and only if, in all possible worlds, where the first proposition is true, the second proposition is also true. So A entails B. If A is true, then B must also be true. Here is another example. I could say China is the most populous country in the world. I could say Sally's dog barks. What is the relationship between these propositions? Is there an entailment relationship between these propositions? Well, no, they're totally unrelated to each other. So China is the most populous country in the world obviously does not entail that Sally's dog barks. The two propositions are unrelated. So whenever the second one, whether the first one is true or false has nothing to do with whether the second one is true or false. These are unrelated propositions. Here's another example. I could say Fluffy is a poodle. And here's another proposition. Fluffy is a dog. What is the relationship here? What is the relationship between these two propositions? Well, it's entailment. How can you tell that it's entailment? Well, we notice that poodle is a hyponym of dog. That means that the reference of the noun poodle is a subset of the reference of the noun dog. So there's the definition. Therefore, in all possible worlds where it is true that Fluffy is a poodle, it is also true that Fluffy is a dog. So that is an entailment relationship. How about this? Fluffy is a dog. Does that entail that Fluffy is a poodle? Does this entailment work? How can you tell that this is not entailment? This is not entailment. Well, there are entities in the reference of dog which are not in the reference of poodle. So if it's true that Fluffy's a dog, it is not necessarily true that Fluffy's a poodle. Fluffy might be some other kind of dog. So Fluffy as a dog does not entail that Fluffy is a poodle. Now, how about this one? Ian has a female sibling. Does that entail that Ian has a sister? What is the relationship here? Well, female sibling is a synonym of sister. So if Ian has a female sibling, then Ian has a sister. So there's an entailment relationship here. What makes this interesting is let's look at it in the other direction. Ian has a sister. Does that entail that Ian has a female sibling? Again, yes, because these are synonyms. So you see here that the entailment actually works in both ways. So these are what we call mutually entailing. When two sentences entail each other in both directions, then we say they are mutually entailing. How about this? No dogs bark expresses a proposition. Sally's dog bark expresses a proposition. What's the relationship between them? The relationship is that they're incompatible. There is no possible world in which both of these are true. So you can't have a world in which no dogs bark and yet Sally's dog barks, because they contradict each other. So these propositions are incompatible. Two propositions are incompatible if there can be no possible world where both are true.